Okay, so as I mentioned, I'll be presenting results from a survey done on what people know about migrant deaths on the US-Mexico border. And the motivation behind this study is that since 1998, nearly 7,000 migrants have died on the US-Mexico border, which we believe constitutes a material human rights crisis. But we also suspected that people know very little about the topic, the numbers, and just how great the numbers are. So in fall 2016, myself, Brad Jones, Omar Garcia Ponce, and Dave Annette conducted a survey on border death awareness. So some background on immigration policy that led to the number of deaths on the border. So in the mid-1990s, with implementation of Operation Gatekeeper and Operation Hold the Line, we saw a funnel effect, whereas before you had migrants crossing mostly through San Diego and El Paso sectors, which are metropolitan areas, and people can very easily cross and get to the U.S. with relatively little effort compared to the Tucson and Yuma sectors, which is where, after the increased enforcement in the El Paso and San Diego sectors happened. The Tucson and Yuma sectors, primarily in Arizona, are hostile. It's not a metropolitan area, and the conditions to cross are much more difficult. So coupled with increased enforcement and the hostile conditions, we had a massive increase in the number of migrant deaths. And if you can see that I clicked the wrong one. The picture that's across, picture was taken by Brad Jones on the southern Arizona, and it's just to highlight the fact that there's people are dying on the border. And this shows the number of migrant deaths from 1998 to 2016 from the U.S. Border Patrol Safety Initiative. The blue line is total deaths, and the green line represents the deaths happening in the Tucson and Yuma sector. And the red line are the deaths that have occurred in the San Diego and El Paso sector. So as we can see, most of the deaths have happened in the Tucson and Yuma sectors, and most of those deaths have happened in the Tucson sector. And this picture just highlights, again, the increase that's happened since the enforcement of Operation Hold the Line and Operation Gatekeeper. So the maps come from Humane Borders, and the first map shows the number of deaths from 2000 to 2004, and then the other one from 1999 to 2016. So you see the increase in the number of bodies that have been found on the border. So to reiterate, the significance is that we've had at nearly 7,000 verifiable deaths on the U.S. southern borders, which constitutes a massive human rights crisis. And to be sure, this is a lower bound estimate, since bodies are only counted if they're found, and it's very likely that many more are not found. However, we also think that this particular aspect of the immigration debate is not covered. Whereas immigration itself is a highly salient topic, we suspect that border deaths are not covered in the media. And to test that suspicion, we looked at the number of stories covered on immigration in general. So that's the blue line. So you see there's a lot, and there was a spike in 2006. The green line are immigration stories that mention the border. And the red line are immigration stories that mention border deaths in particular. And as we can see, it's almost zero throughout from 1998 to 2016. Whenever it goes above zero, those stories tend to come from border states. So now I'll move on to the survey. So we had 2,437 undergraduates take the survey. It wasn't a scientific survey in the sense that there was a random selection of people, but it was intended to be a proof of concept for the idea that people are generally not aware of the issue of border deaths on the southern border. So we designed this survey to assess and evaluate how much people know about deaths on the border and who they blame for those deaths. The survey contained variation across geography, so we had almost an even split between those residing in border states versus non-border states. So the first topic of interest was awareness of the issue. So respondents were asked about their own awareness about migrant deaths, and they were also asked to assess what they think Americans in general know about migrant deaths. So what we found is that, first of all, people in general don't know very much, but Latinos, compared to other racial and ethnic groups, know more than the other ones. And we also found that individual respondents rate themselves as knowing more, being more aware of the issue, and believe that Americans believe much less than they do. So, there we go. So right here we see that there's very few people who think that they know a lot about the issue and that they also think that Americans know a lot about the issue. But in general, people don't know about the issue. We also asked respondents their confidence. Well, they were assigned to one of 3 experimental conditions to assess their level of knowledge about the number of migrant deaths. And of those respondents who were asked to first assess their confidence in their ability to assess the numbers, only 83% of respondents reported little to no confidence in being able to give an accurate estimate. And of those who did give an estimate, the numbers that were given were so varied that it was as if random guessing. So that just went to highlight the point that in general, individuals are not aware of the issue of migrant deaths on the border. For those who were asked to indicate whether they thought the number was higher or lower if given a starting estimate, we found that people tended to underestimate the number of deaths. So after providing an estimate or of the number of migrant deaths, they were informed of the actual number of deaths at the time of the survey, and were asked to provide a one-word response to learning about the actual numbers of deaths on the border. And we found that overwhelmingly the responses were ones of shock and sadness. They were also asked to indicate who they thought was responsible for the deaths. And in general, if we see all respondents, sorry, I'm bad at the clicker. Most people tended to blame US policy, but there are differences across groups. So here we see that, sorry, the numbers. Yeah, so that Republicans were much less likely to say that the US policy is responsible for the increase in deaths compared to Democrats and independents. And they were also more likely to blame immigrants themselves. Okay, sorry about that, the number, I can't really see from here. Yeah, so men were also less likely to say that US policy is to blame for the deaths compared to women, and they were also more likely to say that immigrants themselves are to blame for the deaths. So there's variation in attribution of blame to the deaths, but in general, if we look at all respondents, more people are more likely to say that it's US policy that is responsible for the deaths. And I have this to illustrate the fact that sadness and shock were the most common responses among all respondents. So that's supposed to be black. the black word cloud represents those who blame immigrants. So you see surprise and indifference was also a big response from those who attributed blame to immigrants themselves. But among those who blame the Mexican deterrence, it's sadness again. Among those who blame US policy, it's sadness. And among those who blame the Mexican economy, it's also sadness. So sadness was a very common response. In terms of partisanship, again, we see that sadness, and shock and general feelings of distress were very common responses. And that's true for all respondents, which is the black word cloud, for Republicans, for Democrats, and for independents or non-major party identifiers. So to summarize, we found that in general, respondents were not aware of the issue, although they tended to think that they were more aware of the issue compared to other Americans. We also found that Latinos were more aware of the issue, which is understandable given that the issue of immigration is tightly connected to the Latino community. And we also found that once informed of the actual number of deaths, people tended to react with shock and sadness. So some potential implications of the survey results is that there is a potential to humanize the issue by informing people of real numbers of real people who are in fact dying on the border, and that this could potentially have an increase in helping behavior, in having more sympathy or empathy for the migrants, and to potentially change opinion on immigration. However, obviously that would take a lot, given that the issue itself in the media is rarely covered. Thank you.